Hello friends. So for our final stitch for beginning stitches, we are going to do Maltese Cross, both a filling stitch and an individual stitch. I want to show you the filling stitch first because honestly I think it's a little bit easier, even though it's more time consuming, because the prep work doesn't take as much thought. So what I've done is I've laid out a grid where I counted 10, I think these are half centimeter marks, and including the corners, I just marked 10, and then I laid out lines going in one direction, and then when I was crossing them in the other direction, what I did was always start by going under. Oh, apparently that's not very tight. Always start by going under the thread, and then because it's a square, I also ended by going under, and then the next one was always start by going under, I think. It worked. Excuse me. So that I should always end up with everything doing an over, under, over, under. That's why. I messed up on these two ends, so those will be a little bit funny when I come to them. So, oops for me. I can undo one of those, but not the other one. Anyway. Good to know when I mess up. So now we're going to do the fill, which is I'm going to start just under one corner, and then my next step is I'm going to go under the next one, I believe. Am I going under this? Oh boy. Let me just have a quick check. No, I want to go over it. Sorry. This is where it's really important to, okay, I'm going to go over this because it goes over here, so over it there. There we are. Should have done a prep piece of this. Okay, and then I'm going to round the corner, so I go under the next part and over the next part, and then here's where we get a little bit tricky. So I'm going to go over this, under this, and then over my stitch there. That's better. That's better. And remove some cat hair. And then over here, under here. I sometimes get a little confused, and I always like a guide for these interlacing stitches because sometimes I forget how they're done, and especially when they require further steps, I can forget sometimes what I'm doing. There we go. So these next ones are going to all be the same. I have a really long thread, partly because I'm going to be doing a lot of lacing, and I don't like to have to change my thread in the middle of lacing, but also because I think it was moths that cut my silk skein into spots, or one spot. So I now have a bunch of lengths of thread that are long enough to do my embroidery, and that's really annoying. So unfortunately that means I'm going to noodle a little bit while I pull these through. Okay. And then again, going over, and then under, and then over. Excuse me. And so if I were finishing up here, I would simply finish by going over and then down there. But what I think I'm going to do is do a second row, because you can double this. And when you're doing the next row, it's really easy. You just follow exactly what you did before. So under and over. And under and over. Trying not to catch any of my previous threads. And under, here's where I really want to be careful not to catch my previous threads. Under, over, and I'm going to kind of gently with my fingernail. All right. Amy, you got so caught up in chatting, you forgot to go under there. There we are. There we are. So you can see how it's really easy to see when you mess up. And that is a good thing. There we are. So anyway, as I was saying while I was messing up, I want to be careful to keep this a little bit loose in the tension because I don't want to pull it on top of my first row of stitching. I want it to go beside my first row of stitching. So under where I went under last time, over where I went over last time. There we go. And this is a little bit tricky when the work is in a frame, and it kind of has to be in a frame because you want to keep these trellis stitches under tension, but it also means that sometimes it's just easier if you move your work around. So under, trying not to catch my grounding fabric. There we are. Excuse me. Don't worry, I don't have a cough. I just had lots of dairy with dinner, so inflames the goblet cells and causes more mucus. It's just what you wanted to hear about while you're stitching. Excuse me. Okay, so again, if I finish up here, try not to get it caught on my hoop, and then I'm going to finish by going over there and then down. And if you had a particularly wide grid, you could do a third or even a fourth go around if you wanted to, but I'm not going to do that. So this circles around these 4 points. My next one is going to center around these 4 points. So again, I'm going to come up just under here and let's continue. All right, and we are back to do a single Maltese cross stitch. This one's a little bit more complicated just because we're not just using a grid. We're going to have sort of a slightly broken grid to give us a nice effect. This stitch is also often done on a diagonal. I'm just going to do it flat with the grain here just for ease, so it'll fit next to my other one, but also is sometimes done on canvas so that you can count your stitches. And then you don't have to rely on marks on the fabric the way I have here. You're not supposed to mark up your fabric anyway, especially with pencil like I've done, but I'm just going to live my life. So, all right, I'm going to come from outside of my square. I've just marked 4, it's a 4x4 grid here, but these spots are going to be closer to where my crosses are rather than where my threads are coming up and down. So I've also drawn my lines for roughly where my threads will be. So hopefully that'll be enough of a guide for myself, but I want to come just past this square that I've drawn for myself. And there. Oh, no, wait, I almost did it wrong. I don't want to cross, for my outside grid, I don't want to cross the center line. So here I am at the center, not crossing my center line. There we are. And then I'm going to come up a couple millimeters back and over. And for my inside, I can cross the center. And so I think I'm going to lay it down over top first. Cross my center. And then remember, outside, we don't cross the center. There it is. Okay. And then going past my little square. And then back a few millimeters. Just to give me a decent sized cross to work with. And then outside, so I'm not crossing the center. There we go. Inside. Outside my square, there we are. Inside, I am going to be crossing the center, but now I'm crossing more than one line. So I'll go over and under, cross to just outside my box on the other side, and then inside I'm not crossing the center. And we continue just like this. So I'm eyeballing this a little bit because I'm a bit more familiar with this stitch, excuse me, and also because I can, but this is part of the reason why I suggest trying the fill Maltese cross stitch first, because there's just a little bit less to focus on all at once there. But also, if you want to work this on a counted fabric, like a canvas or an Aida cloth, that might be a little bit easier. There we go. Just remember that you might be counting your ups and downs, or you might be counting actually the places where they cross over. You know, that's not close enough. I want to give myself as much space as possible on my crosses here. So, and here I'm going over 3 of them, over and under and over. Looks like I'll have just enough thread left on this. Perfect. And down. And my last one here, going over and under and down. There we go. So you see how it's almost like a fancy hashtag. I have 4 little squares described, and then a 5th little square in the middle here with my lines. So let me switch threads. All right, so we're back with the interlacing for the single Maltese cross stitch. This one is a little bit more complicated than the fill stitch. There's more going on, and they move in between each other differently. Excuse me. So, I always like to have a reference in front of me because otherwise I will mess it up repeatedly. But for the first part, I can just follow what my ground trellis is saying. So I go over and under, around this corner, over and under, and then I'm going to go over this one and over this one, and then I'm going to turn a corner and go under this one. And this is the part I always forget to do, is that you're always rounding a corner. So I'm going to come then over this one and then round the corner under this one. So if you're having any trouble with getting the single Maltese cross to work, don't worry, you're not the only one. I always need a reference. I usually keep a finished piece somewhere. And I'll do a nice shot of this at the end of the video, hopefully. That'll give you some idea of what it's supposed to look like. Again, whether you have your overs and unders the same as mine, doesn't matter too much so long as you're consistent. And then just pay attention to where your trellis says to go over and under. Now I'm coming up to over top of my previous work, so I'm going to go over, under this thread. Sometimes you have to separate them a little bit to be able to figure out your overs and unders, just like any other interlacing stitch. Feel free to move your work around as well, so that you can see a little better. So I'm going to go over and under, and then over this one, rounding the corner, over and under, rounding the corner, and then we'll just carry on with my next one. I hope I'm keeping this centered. It's also a really good idea to check in with this stitch just every little while. Make sure that you're not, say, splitting your grounding threads, or that you haven't, like I did last time, you haven't mixed up your overs and unders. So just check in with your work every once in a while, just like how in normal embroidery you should check in with the back of your work every once in a while to make sure there aren't any serious snags going on. Okay, and over and under. There we are, starting to get a rhythm of this. So you can see how even though it was really kind of confusing me at the start, once you get going in this, and if you allow yourself to move the thing around more, you do get kind of a sense of it and a rhythm for it. So rounding this corner, over, under, over, both of those, and then under, rounding the corner, always rounding the corner on this. I feel like there was a board game that I learned, always rounding the corner, when I was a child. It was a Klutz Press book. I think it might have even been called Rounders. Can't remember. Or Corners or something. And this formation is what it reminds me of. Over, under. So I'm always letting that grounding trellis guide me in where I should be going over and under. Also, even when I have a whole bunch of over-unders in a row and I'm not turning a corner, I always like to take them one set of over-under at a time, just because that way I can be pretty sure that I'm following my directions properly. So, you can see how my tension sometimes pulls things a little bit out of the way. That's okay. Over, under. Now I'm crossing over more of my threads. So over this guy, under this one. Over that one, under this one. Over that one, over this one as well, and under this one. Again, that's where if I take them one set at a time, I'm far less likely to make a mistake. Do you find this sometimes happens? That's where you can always just give it a little twist, retighten your thread. Part of why that happens is that my fingers naturally twist it as I'm holding the needle, so I just keep an eye on that and pay attention to what I'm doing. See how often that happens. Okay, I think I'm reaching my end, so I finish up with an over, under, and over because I wasn't able to go under my first time. And there we are. This is the single Maltese Cross. Maybe I should have done it a little bit bigger to be a bit more visible. It's just a more interwoven version of the fill, and you can see how when you do it on a diagonal, it does make a very nice cross shape. So thank you. Happy stitching. I know this one is a little bit more complicated, but give it a try.